My beloved child. Your soulmate is trying to reach you right now, but perhaps not in the way you have been expecting. Something has shifted inside their heart. For a long time, they believed that silence would make everything easier. They thought distance would slowly weaken the connection, that memories would lose their power, and that whatever existed between you would eventually become something they could place safely in the past. But something unexpected has happened. The memories they once dismissed as ordinary are beginning to carry a completely different meaning. A conversation they barely thought about before suddenly feels important. A look they once brushed aside now returns with strange clarity. A moment when you understood them without demanding an explanation has started replaying in their mind. And there is one realization they can no longer ignore. You were never as easy to forget as they once believed. Don't skip, because there is something deeper behind their silence, and what they are beginning to understand could completely change the meaning of everything that happened between you. Stay till the end because something huge is waiting for you. There is one message they have not known how to say, even to themselves. For a while, this person tried to convince themselves that moving forward meant leaving certain feelings behind. They kept living. They kept handling responsibilities. They kept having conversations, meeting people, dealing with ordinary days, and doing everything a person does when life keeps moving whether the heart is ready or not. From the outside, nothing may have looked unusual. But inside them, something remained unfinished. It did not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it appeared in the smallest ways. They would hear a phrase that reminded them of something you once said. They would experience a difficult day and suddenly remember how easy it used to be to speak with you. They would find themselves in a room full of people and unexpectedly remember the strange comfort of being understood by one person. You. At first, they tried not to give those moments much meaning. They told themselves memories happen. People remember old connections. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. But then the memories kept returning. And eventually, one question became difficult to avoid. Why do I still remember this? Why do these moments still feel alive after so much time? And this is where everything becomes deeper. They are beginning to understand that they do not remember you only because of dramatic moments. They remember you because of ordinary ones. The kind of moments people rarely appreciate while they are happening. Maybe it was the way you noticed when their mood changed. Maybe it was how you remembered something they had mentioned casually weeks earlier. Maybe it was the way conversations with you could move from something completely silly to something deeply personal without ever feeling forced. Maybe there were moments when they didn't need to perform around you. They didn't have to seem stronger than they felt. They didn't have to explain every emotion perfectly. They could simply exist. At the time, they may have taken that comfort for granted. Now they understand how rare it was. And something surprising has been happening. They have begun comparing that connection to what came afterward. Not intentionally at first. Comparison simply happened. A conversation with someone else would feel fine, but something would be missing. Someone might be kind, interesting, attractive, intelligent, or emotionally available, and yet the feeling would still be different. They would catch themselves wondering why. Nothing was necessarily wrong with anyone else. But nothing felt quite the same. That realization frightened them more than they expected. Because it meant the connection with you had created a kind of emotional reference point inside them. They had experienced something that felt natural enough to seem ordinary when they had it. Only after losing easy access to it did they understand that ordinary was never the right word. Rare was closer. But there is something they still haven't admitted. Part of them thought your importance would disappear when your presence disappeared. Instead, your absence revealed your importance. That truth has been difficult for them to accept. Because accepting it means confronting something uncomfortable. They may not have valued the connection correctly when it was happening. They may have assumed there would always be more time. Another conversation. Another opportunity. Another chance to explain themselves. Another moment to show you what they really felt. But life doesn't always announce the final ordinary moment before something changes. Sometimes two people simply become quieter. A message takes longer. A conversation becomes shorter. Pride enters. Confusion enters. Fear enters. And suddenly the connection that once felt natural becomes complicated. You may have interpreted their silence as indifference. Maybe you thought they forgot. Maybe you believed they moved on without looking back. Maybe their emotional distance convinced you that the connection meant far less to them than it meant to you. But what happens next changes the meaning of their silence. Their quietness may not have come from having no feelings. It may have come from not understanding those feelings well enough to communicate them. There were questions inside them they didn't know how to answer. What exactly is this? Why does this person affect me differently? Why do I feel safer with them than I expected? Why does getting closer make me happy and afraid at the same time? Instead of answering those questions, they may have avoided them. Silence became easier than vulnerability. Distance became easier than emotional honesty. And emotional immaturity can sometimes make people retreat from the very things they secretly value. Not because those things mean nothing. Because they mean enough to create fear. Fear of disappointment. Fear of rejection. Fear of being seen too deeply. Fear of admitting that another person matters. Fear of wanting something they are not certain they can protect. They may understand that now in a way they couldn't before. And there is one sentence they wish they could say to you. Not dramatically. Not as some perfect confession. Just honestly. I understand your value differently now. That realization has been growing slowly. They see certain qualities in you differently than they once did. Things you did naturally. The way you listened. The way you noticed. The way you made emotional space without forcing them to use it. The way you could bring calm into moments that felt heavy. The way you could make an ordinary conversation feel meaningful. Perhaps you never thought those things were extraordinary. Maybe you were simply being yourself. But now, through distance, they understand how unusual those qualities can be. And what they realized next surprised even them. They don't only miss you. They miss the person they became around you. That is a much deeper realization. Around you, certain walls became quieter. They laughed differently. They spoke more openly. They allowed themselves to imagine things they normally dismissed. Maybe there were dreams they could mention to you without feeling foolish. Maybe they could admit worries they usually kept hidden. Maybe they felt more like themselves. Not a perfect version. A genuine one. And now they sometimes wonder where that version of themselves went. Why did I feel different around this person? Why did ordinary moments seem lighter? Why did being understood by them make me feel more capable of understanding myself? This is where the connection stops being only about missing another person. It becomes about identity. You became associated with a version of them that felt honest, alive, hopeful, less guarded. And they didn't fully recognize that while you were there. Now they do. There is another layer they have kept buried even from themselves. The unfinished words. Things they almost said. Things they wanted to say but didn't. Things they assumed you already knew. They are beginning to understand that people cannot always know what we never express. There may have been moments when they cared deeply but acted casually. Moments when they wanted you closer but behaved distant. Moments when they wanted to reassure you but became silent because they couldn't find the right words. And now, in quiet moments, they mentally imagine what they would say if one completely honest conversation became possible. No games. No pretending. No hiding. No trying to appear unaffected. They imagine looking at you and saying, "You mattered more than my actions showed." They wonder how you would react. Would you believe them? Would part of you feel relieved? Would another part feel angry because those words arrived too late? That thought makes them uncomfortable because they know realization does not erase consequences. Understanding something now does not change every hurt created before. But emotional growth often begins when a person stops defending their past behavior and finally sees it clearly. And that may be what is happening inside them. They are no longer asking only whether the connection was meaningful. They are asking why they failed to recognize that meaning sooner. What if I recognized something precious only after I stopped having it in front of me? That question follows them. And slowly, another thought has started appearing. A thought that shifts everything from the past toward the future. What if this connection was not meant to end where it became quiet? Stay till the end, because this is where their thinking begins to change. For a long time, they replayed memories. Now they are beginning to imagine possibility. Not fantasy. Not pretending nothing difficult happened. Not expecting everything to magically return to the way it once was. Something more mature. They imagine another conversation. But this time, they picture themselves listening differently. They imagine asking questions instead of making assumptions. They imagine saying important things before fear talks them out of it. They imagine noticing the small moments they once overlooked. And they realize something. If another chapter ever opened, they wouldn't want to recreate the old one. They would want to build something better. Something shaped by everything the distance taught them. More honesty. More patience. Clearer communication. More appreciation. Less ego. Less assuming. Less pretending there will always be another opportunity. If another chapter ever opens, I want to enter it differently. That realization carries weight for them. Because another chance would not simply mean getting you back into their life. It would mean becoming capable of handling the connection differently. They are beginning to understand that second chances only matter when people bring new awareness into them. Otherwise, people simply recreate the same story. And deep down, they know that is not what they want. There is still one thing they haven't been able to admit. They wonder whether you feel unfinished too. That question scares them. Because perhaps you don't. Perhaps your heart has changed. Perhaps time has taught you something different. Perhaps you had to close a door they left uncertain for too long. They know they cannot assume your feelings stayed the same simply because theirs became clearer. But they still wonder. Does this person ever remember me? Do they ever replay those conversations too? Did the connection leave something behind in them the way it did in me? Do they also wonder why something that became quiet never became completely meaningless? And perhaps the most difficult question of all. If we spoke honestly today, would we discover that both of us misunderstood the silence? That thought keeps returning. Not as certainty. As possibility. And possibility is sometimes more emotionally powerful than certainty because it forces a person to imagine what could happen if courage replaced fear. Their mind has begun creating small pictures of a future conversation. Not a dramatic scene. Something simple. Maybe the two of you sitting somewhere quiet. Maybe the first few minutes feel awkward because so much time has passed. Maybe both of you smile nervously. Maybe there is a moment where neither person knows how to begin. And then someone finally says the truth. I wish we had talked like this sooner. They imagine old misunderstandings slowly becoming clear. They imagine hearing what you were carrying during the silence. Things they never knew. Maybe you felt rejected when they were actually confused. Maybe you were waiting for clarity while they were waiting for courage. Maybe each person assumed the other understood things that were never actually said. And they begin realizing how easily meaningful connections can become complicated when two people communicate through assumptions instead of honesty. But the biggest truth is still ahead. This person is beginning to question whether the most meaningful chapter between you has already happened. For a long time, they assumed the past contained everything important. Now they are not so sure. What if there is still something meaningful waiting beyond the silence? They don't know the answer. And emotionally, that uncertainty matters. Because they are no longer looking at the connection only as something lost. They are starting to see it as something that taught them. Something that changed them. Something that may still hold meaning even if its final shape is unknown. Maybe the connection's purpose was to show them what genuine emotional safety feels like. Maybe it was meant to teach them what happens when people wait too long to express important things. Maybe it was meant to reveal the difference between chemistry and genuine emotional recognition. Or maybe there is still a future conversation waiting somewhere ahead. They cannot know yet. But what they do understand is that silence did something unexpected. It gave them perspective. If the connection had meant nothing, why did its meaning become clearer with time instead of disappearing? That question is difficult for them to dismiss. They remember how they once thought time would erase everything. Instead, time removed distraction. Distance removed familiarity. And without familiarity, they finally saw what they had been receiving from you. Your presence had become so natural that they stopped recognizing its value. Only when it was missing did the empty space become visible. There is a strange irony in that. People often recognize noise immediately. But peace can become invisible when we live inside it long enough. Maybe you were a kind of peace they did not understand until life became louder without you. That does not mean you were perfect. They know that now too. The connection had complications. Misunderstandings. Human flaws. Moments where both people probably could have handled things differently. But emotional significance does not require perfection. Sometimes what makes a connection unforgettable is not that everything went smoothly. It is that something true existed beneath everything complicated. And that is what they are beginning to recognize. They remember the way they felt seen. They remember how certain conversations stayed in their mind. They remember moments when your presence changed the emotional temperature of an entire day. A difficult morning became easier because of one conversation. A moment of self-doubt became lighter because of something you said. A random joke became a memory they still smile at. These things seem small. But maybe meaningful relationships are built from small things people underestimate. Not grand gestures. Not dramatic declarations. Tiny moments of attention. Consistency. Understanding. Comfort. The feeling that someone notices who you are beneath everything you show the world. And now they finally understand why those memories stayed. They were never only remembering events. They were remembering how they felt in your presence. Safe. Recognized. Less alone inside themselves. And now the sentence becomes even clearer. I understand your value differently now. Perhaps before, they valued what you gave. Now they value who you were while giving it. Before, they noticed conversations. Now they notice the emotional safety inside those conversations. Before, they noticed that you cared. Now they understand how rare sincere care can be. Before, they assumed your presence was simply part of their life. Now they understand that someone's presence should never be treated like a permanent guarantee. There is another thought growing inside them. If another opportunity ever appeared, they would want you to meet the version of them that understands this now. Not the person who stayed silent. Not the person who avoided difficult conversations. Not the person who assumed there would always be more time. A more emotionally aware version. Someone willing to say, I see things differently now. Someone willing to admit mistakes without making excuses. Someone willing to listen to what the experience was like for you too. Because they understand something else now. A second chance, if it ever came, would belong to both people. Not only to their wishes. You would have your own questions. Your own boundaries. Your own truth. Your own story of what happened. And real growth means being willing to hear that story even if parts of it are uncomfortable. That is part of what has changed. Before, they may have wanted reassurance. Now they want understanding. Before, they may have wanted closeness without vulnerability. Now they understand the two cannot truly be separated. Before, they might have thought feelings were enough. Now they see that feelings without communication can become confusion. Feelings without action can become regret. Feelings without honesty can create silence where connection once existed. And this realization is shaping their secret hope. They are not simply hoping to return to yesterday. Yesterday had too many things left unsaid. Their deeper hope is that if life ever creates another opening, both people would finally be brave enough to tell the truth. What did this connection mean to you? What did you feel when everything became quiet? What did you wish I understood? What were you afraid to say? What changed while we were apart? Those are the questions they imagine. And maybe somewhere inside that conversation, both people would discover something neither understood before. Could the unfinished feeling be pointing toward a chapter neither of us has experienced yet? Again, they don't know. But they have stopped pretending the question doesn't exist. And sometimes admitting the question is the first honest thing a heart can do. There is one final realization that changes everything. For so long, they thought they missed one dramatic thing about you. Maybe your affection. Maybe your attention. Maybe a certain memory. But now they understand the truth is much broader. You remained important because you made ordinary moments meaningful. That is why the connection was difficult to replace. It was never only about excitement. It was about ease. Not only attraction. Understanding. Not only emotion. Recognition. You became connected to quiet moments that made them feel more like themselves. And when those moments disappeared, their significance slowly became visible. Distance did not create your value. It revealed the value they had failed to fully see. And if they could send one completely honest message across all the silence, perhaps it would be this. I understand now why you stayed in my heart. Not because every memory was perfect. Not because nothing difficult happened. Not because the past should automatically return. But because something about the connection reached deeper than they knew while they were living inside it. They wish they understood sooner what your presence meant to them. They wish they had said more. Asked more. Listened more carefully. They wish fear had not spoken louder than honesty. And perhaps most of all, they wish they had known that some people do not become important through dramatic moments. They become important quietly. Conversation by conversation. Look by look. Small kindness by small kindness. Until one day their absence reveals how much space their presence had been filling. Now your soulmate is beginning to understand that. And their heart is no longer asking only, why do I still remember them? It is asking something new. If another honest moment ever appears between us, what would I do with it? Their answer is different now. They would not assume. They would ask. They would not hide every difficult emotion. They would try to explain. They would not treat meaningful moments as ordinary simply because they happened often. They would notice. They would appreciate. They would speak sooner. And they would want to know you again as the person you have become, rather than expecting you to remain frozen in the past. Because time changes people. Distance teaches people. Loss reveals things. And sometimes the most meaningful second chapter is not about rebuilding what was. It is about discovering what could exist now between two people who finally understand what they failed to understand before. Whether that chapter ever opens cannot be guaranteed. But inside this story, one truth has become impossible for them to deny. The silence did not make the connection meaningless. It made them examine why it mattered. And somewhere beneath all their reflection sits a quiet hope. That maybe, one day, honesty will get the opportunity that fear once took away. That maybe there will be a conversation where nothing important needs to remain hidden. Where both people can finally say what the silence never explained. Where the past is not denied, but understood. Where mistakes become lessons instead of repeated patterns. Where appreciation arrives before another goodbye. And where two people can finally discover whether what remained unfinished was asking to be closed with truth. or opened again with greater wisdom. So perhaps the question is no longer why this connection survived the silence. Perhaps the deeper question is what both hearts would finally understand if the silence ever ended. Because sometimes the meaning of a connection is not fully visible while two people are standing inside it. Sometimes distance creates perspective. Sometimes silence exposes the words that mattered most. And sometimes the person who thought they were moving away from a connection discovers they were actually moving toward an understanding of what it truly meant. Their hidden message is simple now. You mattered. More than they understood. More than their silence showed. And if life ever offers another honest moment, they do not want to waste it pretending otherwise. They do not want yesterday exactly as it was. They want the possibility of something wiser. More honest. More mature. More appreciative. Something built by two people who understand that rare connections should never be treated casually. And somewhere inside that possibility is the thought they still haven't completely allowed themselves to say aloud. Maybe the most meaningful chapter between you was never the one that ended. Maybe it is the one that could only begin after both hearts finally understood what the silence was trying to teach them.